In the vast theater of global diplomacy, choices are rarely made in haste. Behind every headline lies a history, a struggle, and a voice demanding to be heard. Today, we explore a decision that echoes far beyond boardrooms and trade routes. A choice rooted in sovereignty, dignity, and a growing call for balance in a world tilted by influence. This isn't just about economics. It's about respect, about power, and about a nation, India, finally drawing a line in the sand. So sit back, listen close, because by the time we're done, you'll understand why India said, enough is enough. Would you like a similar closing as well? India's move was a response to prolonged economic imbalance and unfair trade terms. Rising nationalism and self-reliance reshaped India's global trade priorities. U.S. pressure, tactics, and policy overreach triggered strategic pushback. India is pivoting towards diversified, multipolar economic alliances. The decision marks a broader shift in global power dynamics and autonomy. For years, India found itself navigating a complex trade relationship with the United States, one that was often lopsided, if veiled behind promises of partnership but grounded in disproportionate advantage. While the narrative on the surface spoke of mutual growth and strategic alliance, the reality was more skewed. India, with its growing economy and massive market, had been subjected to trade terms that increasingly favored American interests. Tariff impositions, regulatory restrictions, and abrupt policy shifts from the U.S. side routinely placed Indian exporters and industries at a disadvantage. In sectors ranging from pharmaceuticals to agriculture, India bore the brunt of decisions made thousands of miles away, often without its consent or consultation. These weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a pattern that gradually eroded trust. Trade isn't just about goods crossing borders. It's about balance, about recognizing the value of each other's economies. But when one side starts to dominate the conversation, setting the rules, moving the goalposts, and leveraging economic might to push its agenda, it ceases to be a partnership. It becomes exploitation dressed up as cooperation. India, for a long time, tolerated this imbalance in the hope that the benefits of global cooperation would eventually outweigh the costs. But as the years went by, the gaps widened. The economic pressure wasn't just felt in financial reports. It reached the small traders, the manufacturers, and the agricultural sectors that are the backbone of India's economy. The country started to realize that maintaining this uneven trade structure was no longer sustainable, nor dignified. The decision to walk away didn't come from anger. It came from clarity. India had to prioritize its own economic stability, protect its industries, and assert its rightful place in global commerce. Ending or drastically reconfiguring trade with America wasn't just a reaction. It was a necessary step to regain control over its own destiny. It marked the moment India stopped asking for a seat at the table and decided to build one of its own. And in doing so, it sent a clear messaging: economic sovereignty is not negotiable. India's shift in trade strategy did not emerge from a vacuum. It was the result of a larger wave sweeping through the nation, a rising tide of nationalism, and a renewed focus on self-reliance. For decades, India operated within the frameworks established by more dominant global powers, often adapting its economy to fit into systems designed by others. But in recent years, there has been a strong cultural and political movement urging the country to reimagine its place in the world, not as a follower, but as a leader. This transformation was not driven purely by ideology, it was fueled by lived experience, economic necessity, and a growing realization that dependency breeds vulnerability. The message became clear across industries and communities. India could no longer afford to rely heavily on foreign nations, especially those that use trade as leverage. This awakening gave rise to policies and initiatives focused on Atmanirbhar Bharat or Self-Reliant India. It wasn't about isolation, it was about strength. It was about ensuring that Indian innovation, manufacturing, and agriculture didn't remain forever at the mercy of international decisions that didn't serve Indian interests. The country began investing more in local production, developing strategic reserves, supporting indigenous startups, and prioritizing domestic capabilities in defense, technology, and infrastructure. This pivot was also emotional. It struck a chord with people across every region, an identity-based shift that connected economic policy with national pride. India wasn't responding to trade deficits or tariff disputes. It was reshaping its narrative. The days of accepting second place or conceding control were over. This mindset began to reflect in its international stance as well. Assertive, confident, and unwilling to compromise on matters of principle. Choosing to end or restructure trade with America was a natural extension of this evolving identity. The decision reflected a larger goal to create a resilient economy that could stand tall without the crutches of unequal partnerships. India's focus turned inward, not out of fear, but out of purpose. The world had watched India rise slowly for years, but this moment marked something different. This was no longer a country adapting to global tides. It was one creating waves of its own, driven by a belief that self-reliance isn't just an option, it's the future. India's decision to reconsider its trade relationship with America didn't arise from a single event. It was the culmination of repeated tactics and policy overreach that had tested the boundaries of diplomatic respect. Over time, the United States began to use trade not as a bridge between allies, but as a lever to influence decisions, to bend outcomes, and to maintain its own strategic dominance. These tactics came in the form of sanctions threats, unilateral trade restrictions, and an increasingly transactional approach to diplomacy, one that valued compliance over cooperation. India watched as critical trade privileges were revoked without meaningful dialogue. Decisions that affected millions of Indian workers and industries were made unilaterally by Washington, often citing political disagreements or shifting strategic interests. These weren't just policy choices. They were subtle assertions of control. What the U.S. framed as necessary adjustments for its own benefit often came across as disregard for India's sovereignty. The imbalance grew starker with each demand: buy more of this, import less of that, align with our position or face consequences. And behind each demand, was the quiet implication that economic opportunity came with political strings. This persistent interference didn't sit well with a country that had worked for decades to shed its colonial past. India had grown too large, too influential, and too aware of its value to be spoken to with conditions. The assumption that it would always acquiesce, that market access alone was enough to buy silence, was outdated. India began to push back, quietly at first, by diversifying trade ties and exploring regional partnerships. Then more vocally, by refusing to comply with what it saw as coercive diplomacy. Ending trade, as it once was structured, wasn't just about economics. It was about setting boundaries. India was drawing a red line, signaling that it would no longer be a passive recipient of external pressure. Any relationship, including one with a superpower, had to be based on mutual respect, not manipulation. The decision to disengage from unequal trade dynamic sent a loud message to the world: India's voice cannot be silenced, and its decisions cannot be dictated. Pressure may work on the weak, but it only sharpens the will of those determined to stand tall. India's decision to reduce its trade dependence on the United States is not a retreat, but a redirection, a strategic pivot toward a more diversified and balanced global economic presence. For too long, global trade revolved around a few dominant players, and many nations, including India, found themselves heavily reliant on a small circle of powerful economies. This structure created vulnerabilities. When one nation sneezed, others caught a cold. India recognized that such concentrated dependencies carried long-term risks, financial, political, and even ideological. So it began looking east-south and across new frontiers. Emerging economies in Africa, Southeast Asia, Latin America, and Central Asia offered fresh opportunities. Markets hungry for cooperation, partnerships based on equity rather than dominance, and trade models grounded in mutual benefit. India began to actively engage in regional trade blocs, revitalize old ties with countries in the global south, and invest in new multilateral frameworks where its voice carried real weight. This wasn't just about goods and services. It was about forging relationships that respected India's autonomy and aspirations. With nations like the UAE, Japan, Russia, Brazil, and Indonesia, India found more receptive partners willing to engage without pushing political agendas. Energy deals, digital economy agreements, defense cooperation, and agricultural trade started to shift away from the traditional West-centric model. These alliances brought flexibility, resilience, and a sense of shared purpose. India's investments in infrastructure, like the International North-South Transport Corridor, Chabahar Port, and various regional connectivity initiatives, were not random projects. They were calculated steps in a long-term plan to ensure that India's future wouldn't be held hostage by the decisions of a few. With every new agreement signed outside of the American orbit, India built an economic safety net, one capable of absorbing shocks and insulating the country from geopolitical whims. What we're witnessing is the emergence of a multipolar economic world, and India is positioning itself right at the center. It is no longer satisfied with being an appendage to a Western-led order. Instead, It is crafting a new space, one that values inclusion, resilience, and shared progress. By pivoting toward these alternative alliances, India is not just reacting to old imbalances. It's proactively shaping a future where trade is not a tool of power, but a platform for partnership. India's move to break away from its traditional trade ties with America is more than just a policy shift. It signals a deeper transformation in the global power structure. For decades, economic dominance was concentrated in the hands of a few Western nations, particularly the United States, which set the tone, terms, and tempo of international commerce. But the world is changing. The once clear lines of influence are blurring, and a more multipolar order is taking shape. India's decision is a reflection of that change, not a rebellion, but a declaration of independence in a world that no longer runs on old hierarchies. This moment speaks to something larger, a global pushback against economic control disguised as cooperation. Countries across the world are waking up to the realization that sovereignty is as much about currency and commerce as it is about borders and politics. India, with its scale, market size, and cultural depth, is asserting its place in this emerging landscape, not as a junior partner, but as an equal player. The era of economic obedience is giving way to a new age of self-defined partnerships. And India is leading by example. Its move to step back from an unbalanced trade relationship with America is not a retreat from the global stage. It's a re-entry on its own terms. This decision redefines what strength looks like. It's not about who has the biggest economy, but who has the courage to say no. Who can withstand the pressure? Who dares to walk away from the table when the deal isn't fair? And India has done just that. By breaking with convention, India is inspiring other nations to rethink their own dependencies. It is showing the world that growth doesn't have to come at the cost of dignity. That standing firm can be as powerful as signing deals. This isn't just about tariffs, exports, or imports. It's about a psychological shift in global affairs. The message is clear: no nation, however powerful, has the right to dictate another's path. In the end, India's decision is not about its own future. It's a ripple in the fabric of global power, one that signals a new era of autonomy, accountability, and awakened identity. The world is watching and learning. So now the picture becomes clearer. This was never just about trade agreements or policy disputes. It was about dignity, about a country deciding it would no longer play by rules that were written without its voice, negotiated without its consent, and enforced without its benefit. India didn't walk away from America. It walked toward itself, toward a future shaped by its own hands, guided by its own interests, and rooted in its own strength. What we've witnessed is not an act of rebellion, but an act of maturity. A sovereign nation rising to the occasion, refusing to be a pawn in a larger game. In standing firm, India has shown that silence is not peace, compliance is not progress, and dependency is not diplomacy. The decision to end or restructure trade with America is a declaration, not of hostility, but of independence, a line drawn not in anger, but in clarity. And for those watching from afar, trying to make sense of this shift. Understand this: India has not turned its back on the world. It has simply turned the page. A new chapter begins, one in which balance matters more than alignment, where partnership means equality, not obedience, and where power is no longer defined by domination, but by the ability to walk away with grace, with strength, and with purpose. This is India's moment. Not because it chose conflict, because it chose itself. And in doing so, it changed the conversation for good.